CTV's W5.
The Canadian heavyweight champion, George Chuvalo.
A life of triumph, tragedy, and pain. CTV's W5.
The Canadian heavyweight champion, George Chuvalo.
A life of triumph, tragedy, and pain.
He survived in the super exploitive, cruel world of boxing.
He wasn't just a one-dimensional brawler kind of guy. He could box.
I saw my father as fearless.
Chuvalo has never been knocked off his feet.
My father was larger than life.
And
you learn how to make the most out of tough situations.
locked down in a deadly prison far from home.
Everything happened extremely quickly.
There was very, very little hope.
I was scared, confused, desperately trying to understand what was going on.
This is going to take a miracle.
Here is Avery Haynes.
Welcome to W5. His name is synonymous with boxing in this country. Heavyweight champion George Chuvalo, the man who took on Muhammad Ali. W5 has interviewed him 4 times over the years. Sandie Rinaldo last spoke to him in 1996. She returns tonight with a poignant update on George and his resilience living with dementia.
Corner from Toronto, the Canadian heavyweight champion, George Chuvalo.
George Chuvalo, a Canadian legend, one of the toughest fighters in boxing history. In a 21-year career in nearly 100 fights, he was never knocked down, not once. Celebrated for enduring 15 rounds with Muhammad Ali. and for taking on the biggest names in the ring. But when the spotlight dimmed, Chuvalo was brought to his knees by financial ruin and personal tragedy. His family of 7, 4 sons and a daughter, shattered by drugs, overdoses, and suicides.
The situation we were in, you have to develop coping skills, right? So I developed coping skills.
You have 3 drug addicts in a house with a father who's struggling financially. His wife's not there. I'm not there. It was a hard time. It was hard.
He lost 3 sons, Jesse, George Jr., and Stephen, and his wife Lynn in just 11 years. His only daughter Vanessa and eldest son Mitch also left to make sense of immense tragedy.
How do you deal with that grief? I felt like my heart was beneath my feet. I didn't know what to do. But my dad was feeling so much grief. I couldn't save him, and he couldn't really save us. We had to find our own way.
That was the start of the roller coaster ride.
I interviewed George in 1996. His loss is still raw.
I don't know how you cope with one after another after another. Where do you find the strength?
I think outwardly I appear strong, and I guess I am to some degree, but I know how I hurt privately. I don't think I'm so strong privately.
And this summer reconnected with him in a much different place.
Sometimes as journalists we do stories and we don't revisit them, so for me it was important to revisit this story and find out how he's doing all these years later. He can't move anymore. He is in the throes of dementia. This was not the force of nature I interviewed 27 years ago. This was a man nearing the end of his life.
George was born in 1937 in Toronto to Croatian parents who immigrated to Canada. His father worked at a meatpacking plant where George would also get a job at the age of 15. He started boxing, and at just 18 years old, he was the amateur heavyweight champion of Canada.
To understand my dad, you really have to understand my grandparents. And he is 50% his father, a violent, stern, disciplined person with a huge pain threshold, and my grandmother, who was warm, loving, emotional, caring, cry in an instant. There's nothing inauthentic about my father.
In 1956, at 19, George turned pro and started earning money to fight matches in some of the biggest venues in the world.
For the heavyweight championship of the world.
In the blue corner, George Chuvalo!
He trained at the Lansdowne Boxing Gym in West Toronto.
Nice to be back in the West End, Bloor and Lansdowne.
Oh, wow. This brings back a lot of memories. And there's what used to be the Lansdowne Boxing Gym with the wrought iron rickety stairway.
Fire escape, yeah. I used to think it was so high, you know, up there, like
it was.
Panorama of the West End from up there.
You could smell this old sweat.
Like it was embedded into the wall.
It was embedded in the walls. And then you walk in and it's like the scenery
Dusty.
But it was like exciting because you have this ring, and all men, mostly men. There were some women there. You know,
but women weren't boxing back
No,
then.
they were just like watching.
Hang around.
Like girlfriends and whatnot. And I seemed to be the only female child.
Stephen Brunt is a Canadian sports writer and boxing historian. Brunt has known George Chuvalo for 4 decades and remembers the legendary gym.
It's sort of like what you would imagine a boxing gym would be like in the movies. Like it was almost a cliche. And there was kind of a card game going on all the time. There were these characters there who looked like they were out of central casting. There was a lot of stuff going on there. There were a lot of illegal activities going on there.
Not only fighters and bookies, but musicians visited the gym. Legends like Miles Davis and Ronnie Hawkins.
Inside it was like machine gun-like. People yelling and screaming, skipping rope on a wood floor. The rat-a-tat-tat of it all. Yeah, the noise was very distinctive.
When you were growing up, can you imagine yourself a little girl again and thinking about your dad? How did you view your dad when you were a kid? How did you see him?
I saw my father as fearless, as a great protector and a loving a loving dad. To me, he was bigger than life, and I felt privileged to have that. But also, I was the only girl. I was the youngest, with 4 older brothers.
Daddy's little girl?
In a sense, my dad really didn't know how to deal with me. But I always felt special. I did. I felt like I was on a bit of a pedestal. He took me everywhere.
When he came home, when he was at home with all of you kids, what kind of a dad was he?
My dad was wonderful. He was always trying to expand our horizons. My father was authentically alive. There's so much out there about him. There are great stories written about him. There are great interviews like he's had with you before. I think he was such an authentic character.
No matter where you're watching, greetings from Maple Leaf Gardens in Toronto. Tonight, in a 15-round international contest, world heavyweight champion Muhammad Ali defends his title against George Chuvalo of Toronto, the Canadian heavyweight champion.
By the time he fights Ali in '66,
A bell for round 1.
he's 10 years into his professional career already. Like, he's not some up-and-coming kid. You know, you think of why do people know about George Chuvalo? It's especially because of the Ali fight, of course.
Stephen Brunt chronicled the Chuvalo-Ali fight in his book, Facing Ali.
He was not an obvious guy to fight Muhammad Ali in March of 1966, but they needed somebody fast. And so they went to George and said, will you take the fight on 17 days' notice? And he said yes. So the most important moment in his professional life, in his boxing life, the reason people remember him was in a lot of ways a complete fluke. Muhammad Ali in 1966 is at the height of his powers. He's lightning fast. He's the fastest heavyweight in history.
I think that's the big question tonight. Can he actually knock this man out?
Chuvalo has never been knocked off his feet. Never been knocked out.
I went to the Ali fight in '66. I was in the 4th row. So,
Wow.
Yeah, I remember my mother telling me about what was going to transpire, that people were going to be hitting each other and I should be preparing myself.
How old were you at the time?
6.
6, okay. That was quite the match. He took one hit after another, and at the end, Ali's hands were bloodied from going after your father.
Yeah.
Did that make you uncomfortable? Did you squirm? Were you worried for your dad?
I can't remember if I was worried for my dad. I do, however, remember standing up on the seat and yelling at the referee, Jackie Silvers, to get the heck out of the way so my dad could hit him. So yeah, I was engaged with it. Of course, I wasn't aware of all the damaging things that can happen to a fighter.
5 seconds.
I always looked at my father with a sense of his being a bit of a Superman.
It's all over. Your winner, Muhammad Ali.
In hindsight, I think we kind of look back on that and view it as a triumph. And George put on a brave and honorable performance. Ali that night would have beaten Joe Louis, I think. You know, I think he would have beaten just about anybody you can name. And George hung in with him and never took a backward step. So, you know, George's reputation was, in that moment, was for bravery, his willingness to endure.
Chuvalo would continue to fight the best in the world: Joe Frazier, Ernie Terrell, George Foreman.
Here's round 1 of this 10-round heavyweight bout. George Chuvalo in the blue trunks with the red border. Chuvalo's best is his left hook, and he got that in twice to the body. And McCarty is telling the boys not to get too rough. It isn't often you see Chuvalo using a left jab. Maybe they taught him something.
His skills, I think, were always a little bit underrated. He wasn't just a one-dimensional brawler kind of guy. He could box. George always kind of resented this idea that all he was a guy who took punches and kept coming, that he was a punching bag. He wasn't. He was way, way better than that.
It's all over.
Still, the constant blows to the body, to his head, a concern. Even back in 1969, when he spoke to W5's Ken LaFoley.
You do catch a lot of punches in a fight, and you do swell up. Have you ever had a medical examination that wasn't that pre-fight routine examination, but that where some serious professional medical man had a look at you to find out what, if anything, all of these years of taking this kind of punishment have done to you?
Well, we must have, I believe it's called EGG test or EEG, head test.
Electroencephalogram,
right,
yeah.
And of course they give you the electrocardiograph test for your heart, and they give you all types, especially in New York State, they give you a complete, thorough, 100% examination, and there's nothing been found wrong with me, even though we have these tests every 6 months when we go to New York. So, if there's any damage, it's certainly well hidden, and I don't think it shows. So
How do you feel? How do you feel? Do you feel, not when you're going into the ring, but just when you're getting up in the morning to spend an ordinary day at home with the kids? How do you feel? Do you feel as sharp as you used to?
In fact, I feel sharper now than I ever felt. Certainly, yeah.
After that 1969 interview, Chuvalo would continue to fight for nearly a decade.
Was that my best? Well, I was functioning pretty well. I was satisfied with myself. I mean, I wouldn't say I was perfect or anything like that, but I was pretty happy the way it turned out.
And while he was stoic in the ring and quick thinking with reporters, the cost of pro boxing would catch up with George Chuvalo.
Next on W5.
It's an awesome battering that Chuvalo is taking.
The battles outside the ring.
I couldn't comfort her. She couldn't comfort me.
When W5 continues.
George Boom Boom Chuvalo, a Canadian heavyweight boxing champion. He turned pro at 19 after knocking out 4 opponents in one night in 1956.
I put a lot of years into building a strong foundation.
W5 has interviewed George 4 times, and in 1971, Norm Perry asked him why he stays in the ring.
The constant hope of fame, fortune, and prestige makes it difficult for many men to give up boxing. George Chuvalo keeps on fighting because of what he calls a respect for power.
I think all kids, especially if you come from kind of a rough neighborhood, and I think you can recognize the respect for power because other kids bully you around. All of a sudden, you know that power means something.
driven to take the punches.
It's an awesome battering that Chuvalo is taking. He is now spitting blood.
George was a tough fighter. This took a toll on his body and his mind. And now, at the age of 85, he has dementia and is living out his life at a nursing home just blocks from where he once trained. I went to see him there, but we didn't take cameras in.
We will not show him in his bed. His children who are with me, Mitch and Vanessa, both want him to be remembered as a gentle giant, a man who loved his family, who, yes, experienced enormous tragedy, but provided strength.
He survived in the super exploitive, cruel world of boxing for 21 years.
Mitch Chuvalo is George's oldest son. He visits him at the care home every single day.
I mean, think about the metric in my brain. I'm going, okay, 1 concussion or 2 concussions, how does that stack up against 1,000 sub-concussive blows to the head?
Blow after blow after blow to the head.
Yeah, death by 1,000 blows.
The years after boxing have hurt George Chuvalo and his surviving children the most.
He endured so much tragedy in your family, right? The loss of 3 sons, to heroin, to drug use, the loss of his wife, his high school sweetheart. How did you come through this unscathed? Or maybe you didn't.
Well,
maybe you didn't.
No, I think about my psychological landscape. I've had challenges, as anybody who was in my situation or anybody in my family. I developed coping skills.
Jesse, the youngest, took his life in 1985 at the age of 20, after years of surgeries and painkillers tied to a childhood injury.
My brother Jesse, it's still, his death still haunts me more than any of the others, because he opened a Pandora's box once he took his own life. And that escape route was opened up for other people in my family.
George Lee and Stephen also became addicts. In 1993, just 8 years later, George Lee was the next to die. He had been in and out of prison, and at the age of 30, overdosed on heroin. And just 4 days after, their mother, Lynn, took her life. In 1996, I talked to George about the grief.
It's unbearable to look at your wife. You lost her this son. And I know she felt the same when she looked at me. I couldn't comfort her. She couldn't comfort me. She wasn't a heroin addict, but she took drugs to take her life.
Did you have any suspicion whatsoever that it was that bad for her?
I felt she was going to take her life. I didn't know it would be that quick.
That's my mother and I. I was a mama's girl.
Vanessa is George's only daughter. She wasn't even born until after her father's famous Muhammad Ali fight.
I love looking through old photos. Tell me who everybody is here.
So this is Mitchell. That's Stephen. That's Georgie. That's Jesse. That's myself. And that's my mother and father. So this is Jesse. He loved nature, and my mother always made sure we went camping every year. This is on an island called Beckwith Island in Georgian Bay, and this is Jesse at our house at Gulfwood. Jesse died when he was 20, and after he died, it kind of set a downward spiral. This is myself and my father, one of my father's proudest moments. I graduated from University of Guelph in 1993.
He does look very proud in this
He's
shot.
very proud. Sadly, that was shortly after that. That's the year that my brother died and my mother died.
And 3 years later, Vanessa found a third brother, Stephen, had overdosed at her apartment.
He had a hard time dealing with his 2 younger brothers dying. So when you're an addict, what do you do to kind of not feel that pain? You're going to continue, right? And he had a very hard time.
So you found your brother?
Yes.
You found Stephen?
Yes. It was horrible.
Excitement of viewing the smack with the heroin in the dealer's hands.
After the tragedies, George Chuvalo toured high schools talking about the dangers of drugs. He married again soon after and adopted his new wife's children. He tried to find new ways of making money, which didn't always work. His second marriage ended as his health declined. Author and journalist Stephen Brunt has followed his life and career.
He never could settle into anything after boxing. Boxing provided him with a level of discipline because of the training, and it provided him with a payoff, setting a goal, getting to that moment, having the fight, getting paid. There's a real rhythm to the life of a boxer. But outside of boxing, he never found anything that gave him that kind of rhythm, and he was still always looking for the big score, the get-rich-quick scheme. But he could never settle into anything, and he had this kind of manic energy. So, he was never in one place for very long. He was buzzing here and buzzing there and had a million things on the go.
There were always undesirables hanging around, always hanging around the gym, always coming to our house. Not the greatest judge of character, my father.
As a writer, he was a great subject. I learned something about the complexity of us as human beings, especially when you're writing about sports figures, that you can be many different things. You can be who you are in the arena or in the ring, and then you are who you are outside the arena and outside the ring. Those things can be contradictory sometimes.
I'm so lucky. I have YouTube footage. I've got magazine articles. I've got newspaper write-ups that will entertain me the rest of my life.
He'll never be lost to you.
Never be lost to me.
It was difficult, though, I have to say. It was difficult to watch him immobile, lying in that bed and staring off into the distance. Are you prepared to lose him?
Yes. Yeah. Once the dementia was diagnosed, I prepared myself for that. I've been around boxing all my life. Neurocognitively, so it never ends well. It never ends well. So I steeled myself for that long ago.
How do you think your dad wants to be remembered?
I think my father wants to be remembered as a very tough, diligent, hardworking son of working class people.
My father was larger than life. He was my protector, but when I go see him and I look at him, I'm still awed by how handsome he still is and how strong he still looks. But it is very sad. It's sad because he's helpless. But in a sense, he's still kind of fearless. He's not afraid.
George recently turned 86 years old, and Mitch says he plans to take his dad out to visit the places in Toronto he once called home. We'll be right back.
Coming up.
It kind of seemed like it was reckless.
A hockey coach in dangerous lands.
This armed military officer approaches me.
When W5 continues.
Imagine being wrongly imprisoned in a country far from home. What would you think about? How would you cope? Rick Westhead has the remarkable story of a former college athlete who found himself behind bars in Syria and how hockey, of all things, helped him survive.
Sam Goodwin grew up in a hockey family, the oldest of 5.
We like to say that our faith life was more important than our hockey life, but hockey was certainly a close second.
Some of my best memories are playing street hockey with my brothers in the driveway.
There was a lot of equipment in our house and in the car all the time. I remember I had a friend get in the car and be like, "What's that smell?" And I'm like, "I don't even smell it. I don't even know what you're talking about," because I was so immune to it.
The Goodwins lived in Bowling Green, Ohio, and cheered for the Red Wings until Sam was 12, when the family moved to St. Louis and their allegiance changed.
The Blues were immediately a part of our life.
It was very common for us to spend hours on end at the dinner table talking about the Blues, different players.
And in St. Louis, current and former Blues players were very involved in minor hockey.
Sam's first coach, as I remember we moved here, was Basil McRae.
Oh, McRae really hammering with the right. Oh, baby!
He was certainly very intense, you know, old school hockey, which I think that resonated with me and Sam. You learn how to battle through adversity. You learn how to make the most out of tough situations.
Sam was undersized, but an excellent skater, and he earned a scholarship to play hockey at Niagara University in Niagara Falls, New York. When he graduated in 2012, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do. So he took a job with a family friend halfway around the world, in Singapore.
During my time there, I took advantage of the opportunity to explore as much of the region and beyond as possible. Some colleagues and I, we would go and coach as well. We'd coach kids in Singapore, in the Philippines. We also coached hockey in North Korea and Turkmenistan and India.
Make a pass, okay? Same thing, loop.
And in early 2018, I realized that I had traveled to 120 countries in the world. And at that point, I remember thinking, maybe I could go to all of them.
Over here, over here.
Frankly, I was obsessed with my travel journey. The priority was the experiences, and that's what I put everything into.
I felt like kind of the rest of us were, you know, getting married or starting to date and kind of going more the traditional route. And Sam being the oldest, we're like, when is he just gonna be done with all this?
I really thought that nothing was going to happen in Sam's life until he had traveled to all 193 countries.
I certainly didn't support my brother going to countries that are very hostile towards Americans. It kind of seemed like it was reckless and not worth going to these countries for what seemed to be an Instagram post.
The 2018 season started miserably for the Blues. But after a mid-season coaching change, they went on a miraculous run, from dead last in early January to a playoff spot.
The Blues turnaround has been stunning.
Oh my, this is getting special.
Sam went to Game 4 of the Blues' first-round series against the Jets, but watched the rest on TV. From Nauru in the South Pacific,
the St. Louis Blues are headed to the Western Conference Final.
From Singapore, and from the United Arab Emirates.
And then I watched the Blues beat the Sharks in the Western Conference Final from Erbil, Iraq.
For the first time in 49 years, the St. Louis Blues are headed to the Stanley Cup Final.
On May 25th, 2 days before Game 1 of the Stanley Cup Final, Sam crossed from Iraq into Syria. A fractured country in the midst of a civil war widely considered to be one of the most dangerous countries in the world. The Syrian government was an authoritarian regime led by President Bashar al-Assad, a man notorious for using chemical weapons on his own citizens. Sam entered the northeastern part of Syria and went to the town of Qamishli, which at the time was hundreds of miles away from combat.
A couple hours after arriving, I was talking to my mom on FaceTime.
He was panning the landscape, and I saw like outdoor cafes and street markets, and it looked like a really idyllic place.
As I was talking to her, this armed military officer approaches me, and he points at me and he tells me to come to his side of the road.
Then I just hear, I'm talking to my mom, and then the line goes quiet. I called him right back, and I couldn't get through, and so I tried to put it out of my mind that maybe the internet had dropped, but I didn't like the way that sounded.
They took me just up the road to a building that seemed to be some kind of military office, and for the next 3 hours, I was essentially interrogated. They were very skeptical about my travel motives and my travel history, and they accused me of coming to Syria with bad intentions. I was scared, confused, and I was desperately trying to understand what was going on.
After one night in a jail cell in Qamishli, Sam was flown in the cargo hold of a Syrian military plane to Damascus.
I was driven to the center of town and taken into the basement of a facility that I now know is called Syria's Military Intelligence Prison, number 215, a facility notoriously known for housing political prisoners. It's known to be essentially a human slaughterhouse.
After a couple of days, when the family still hadn't heard from Sam, they took action.
Different people were chasing different leads, but we were certainly working with the Vatican. We were working with some NGOs on the ground in Syria. We were working with some journalists. We cast the net very wide.
The FBI told us that if the word got out and into the wrong hands and it was made public, they'd probably immediately kill Sam or make his situation worse and use it as leverage. So it was very, very important that this was super, super hush-hush.
From day one, they said, hey, like, this is tough for us. Like, we don't really have much representation in Syria or in that region. It would be wise to manage your expectations, which, you know, we could kind of read through what they were saying. Like, there's a chance we might not ever see Sam again.
The only thing might be if you find someone who has any influence on Assad. The FBI said 100% the only way that Sam will be released is if Assad signs off.
That just seemed overwhelming to me. Just how is this going to happen? But my husband, right away, he says, okay, this is what we have to do. We have to find an influencer of Assad.
I wasn't going to sit still and not make this my top priority. In the evenings, I would spend an hour working out, and then I'd spend another 2 or 3 hours by myself, kind of organizing what happened that day, getting prepared for the next day. You know, that was my approach. And as long as I was staying busy on this and felt that, you know, we were making progress every day, that's how I got through it.
Solitary confinement is torture. It's designed to break you. Every day I would hear the sounds of inmates in neighboring cells screaming from being beaten and tortured. I'm not sure I knew what fear was until I heard a grown man screaming for his life. The cell wasn't too small. I could walk around just a little bit, but it had no window. It was all concrete. I had nothing but a small blanket to lay on the cement floor as a bed. I realized very quickly that I needed to maintain a connection to the outside. It was something that helped me remain emotionally and psychologically in tune, so I fought very hard to keep track of the days. Inside my cell, I chipped this rock off the cell wall, and I carved a calendar into the wall, and when I would go to bed, I would mark an X. I also knew that the Blues were playing in the final. I knew when those first 4 games were, and I put small marks on the calendar for those 4 games so that I could think about that when it happened and have a few seconds of kind of relief.
On June 12th, the St. Louis Blues were in Boston for a winner-take-all Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. And Tag watched at the bar.
That was a really, really hard day. Just awful.
That was the first time in my life I had seen my husband overserved, as they say.
Tarasenko sent one in front. Score!
I didn't want to watch it with a bunch of guys. Wanted to watch it by myself. And I remember thinking to myself, you know, is this really real?
For the first time in their history, the St. Louis Blues are the Stanley Cup champions.
Sam had been gone for 3 weeks now, and there was very, very, very little hope.
Up until that point, it was like throwing darts in the dark. There was nothing that was really concretely sticking.
Everyone was telling us this wasn't going to end well. Everyone told us to manage our expectations or that we would never see our brother again. There were like no words. I just felt like this is going to take a miracle.
When we return,
There was no greater moment of relief in my life.
in the darkest days, a ray of hope.
I think I genuinely jumped up and down a couple times.
When W5 continues.
By June 14th of 2019, Sam Goodwin had been missing in Syria for 3 weeks, and his sister Stephanie was losing hope.
It was always in the afternoons I felt like I was having the hardest time with things. My escape was always going on a run. Something came over me that I felt like I really needed to tell somebody something. And the only person that came to mind was Steph, my old college roommate. So I call Steph and I say, "You're never gonna believe this. My brother went missing in Syria." And she says, "That is so awful. Is there anything I can do to help?" And I said, "From what I'm told, unless you know someone who's friends with Assad, all you can do is pray." And her response was, "Is it okay if my dad calls your dad?" And I said, "Yeah, it is, yeah."
Tag spoke with Stephanie Hajar's father, George, and learned that his brother-in-law, Stephanie's uncle Joseph, had a connection with a Lebanese general named Abbas Ibrahim, the head of an intelligence agency called the General Security Directorate.
As it turns out, you know, his friend, the general, is one of the few people in Lebanon that have a relationship with President Assad. That was probably the first time that I'd heard somebody as confident. I don't think he said we could be successful, but he goes, "Tag, I can help."
On June 22nd, Sam was transferred to Adra Prison in Damascus, the largest civilian prison in Syria. He was around other prisoners for the first time.
There was a phone at Adra that would get passed around between the cells. There were 2 rules with the phone, though. One is the only language that could be spoken was Arabic, and 2, all calls had to be made within Syria. So it was totally useless for me. But as I watched this phone being passed around and people talking to family members or whoever, I approached one of my friends and I said, "Hey, would it be possible for you to call someone in your family, whoever you're talking to, and then have them send a message to my sister?"
So I'm at my uncle's lake house in Sunapee, New Hampshire, and my phone goes off, and it's an Instagram message from an account called Black Chrysanthemum. And it's like, "Hi, my name is Doa. My brother in prison with your brother." And I am like freaking out right now. I'm like, I cannot believe this. I jump off the couch. I'm like dialing my dad before I even like finish reading the message. I'm like, all right, well, let's send him something back. We got to get it fast. I want him to know that he got it to us. And so we say, "Hi, Doa, thank you so much for getting this message to us. Is there anything else you can tell me about my brother? And please tell him I cannot wait to eat a Chipotle burrito with him." And the reason I said Chipotle burrito was because we always eat Chipotle together. It was the next day, about 24 hours later, and Sam says, he said, "I love you too. I can't wait to eat a Chipotle burrito together. And did the Blues win the cup?" And for me, this was just like the best ever because like you just don't know, like even if he's alive, you don't know like what his mental state is and you don't know like if he's been tortured and like even the fact that he could like ask the question, even just ask the question like, "Did the Blues win the cup?" Like that he could even think about that, I was just like so over the moon.
A few days later, my fellow inmate said that he had a message back and it said the Blues won the cup. I was like I think I genuinely like jumped up and down a couple times. And at that point, I knew that I had established contact.
Despite the joy they felt at connecting with Sam, the family still had no word on if or when he would be released.
We really had all of our eggs in one basket, it felt like at that point. So if that path went dark like every other path had, we really, really had nothing at that point.
Then, on July 26th, the breakthrough they'd been praying for. A phone call from Joseph. Incredibly, General Ibrahim had secured Sam's release, and the family needed to get to Beirut as soon as possible.
There was no greater, moment of relief in my life.
I was just like, absolutely elated, like just like running around outside, like crying, like I could not believe this, that like a miracle like basically had been done unto our family.
At the same time, Sam was escorted out of Adra prison and driven quickly out of Damascus.
We came up to a checkpoint, one that seemed to be some kind of significant border. And as we passed through, the officer in the vehicle sitting next to me, he said, "Sam, you're in Lebanon. You're safe now."
Everything happened extremely quickly. We landed in Beirut and traveled at a high rate of speed to a military office.
We get out of this vehicle and we ride this elevator up, and they open it up and Sam is right there, and I just hugged him and just, you know, Sam, I just love you so much. And I go, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Yes." And then I said, "Did they hurt you?" And he said, "No."
That was indescribably emotional and frankly a breathtaking display of God answering prayers.
You know, all in all, he looked pretty good. You know, once we got comfortable that Sam was okay, so to speak, he quickly was asking about the St. Louis Blues Stanley Cup.
The security let us pass so that we could be at the gate to get Sam. First one off the plane, he held a little plastic bag, and we just came running up to him and held him. And yeah, I remember him holding me and he was like, "You're unbelievable. Thanks so much for everything."
One of the most overwhelming things for me was learning about all the efforts that were made on my behalf, from people who loved me to people who had no idea who I was, and everywhere in between. And it's several years later now, and I'm still saying thank you.
In the months that followed his return home, Sam completed his travel journey, and in the years since, he's become an advocate for political hostages and the wrongfully detained.
Over the past several years, I've been speaking publicly about my experiences, but more importantly, about what I think others can take from it.
I'm nothing special. I just found a strength inside of me that we all have within ourselves.
What I tell young athletes is that you might not even be aware of the skills and traits that you're developing. I'm not totally sure that I was, but I can tell you that the harder you work now, the better you'll be prepared in the world.
What I've learned to be true is that we can't always choose the exact path that we take in life, but we can always choose. We can always choose the way in which we walk it.
I don't want to be known for the things that happened to me. I want to be known for the way I've responded to them.
A book about Sam's ordeal in Syria is due out next year. We'll be right back.
50 years of memorable moments. Action, Sandie. On
I like to be the center of attention.
and off the record. How rude. A revealing look at a remarkable career.
So here's to 50.
Watch next Friday at 10 on CTV.
W5 Stephen Dewar and Chuck Green flew down to Miami this week to see if Muhammad Ali is really the guy he says he is.
And I ain't gonna be joking. I'll be pecking and a poking, pouring water on his smoking.
It was billed as the fight of the century, Muhammad Ali versus Smokin' Joe Frazier.
I'm the champ, and I'm gonna make them all eat their words.
The year is 1971, and W5 caught up with Ali as he prepared for his return to the ring after being stripped of his heavyweight title for his controversial stance on the war in Vietnam.
Very few people know how to go about finding what's the best purpose in their life that they should try to fulfill. And mine was just to be the world heavyweight champion. And then also not only being the champion, but keeping my dignity, my pride, and my manhood, not Uncle Tom, as they say, selling out my people just for the white man's dollar.
You can see that entire documentary as well as all of our news stories on W5's official YouTube channel. I'm Avery Haynes. On behalf of everyone here at W5, thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.